I spent $8.8 million buying my husband's widowed mother the mansion she'd dreamed about for 20 years. When she cried and called me the daughter I never had, I believed every word. 3 days later, while I was putting on my dress for my sister-in-law's wedding, my phone buzzed. It was my husband. "Don't come. Mom says you're an embarrassment, and she doesn't want you in the family photos." I read the message twice before quietly taking off my wedding ring. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply called one person and gave a single instruction. 45 minutes later, the wedding stopped. My mother-in-law was screaming, and my husband finally understood exactly who he'd betrayed. "My name is Emma Brooks. I'm 31 years old, and 6 years ago I married the man I believed would stand beside me through every success and every storm." Looking back now, I realize I was the only one truly committed to that promise. I built a real estate investment company from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous in the beginning. There were years of 14-hour days, rejected deals, and sleepless nights wondering whether I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Eventually, those sacrifices paid off. By the time I turned 30, my company owned commercial buildings, luxury homes, and apartment developments across Illinois. Daniel often told people he was proud of me. At family dinners, he'd smile and call me the smartest woman in the room. I believed him. His mother, Margaret, wasn't nearly as enthusiastic. She rarely insulted me directly. Instead, she'd criticize my clothes, joke that I worked too much, or remind everyone that a real wife spent more time at home than in boardrooms. Daniel always squeezed my hand under the table afterward and whispered, "Please don't take it personally. Mom doesn't mean anything by it." So I kept forgiving her. Then everything changed 3 days before my sister-in-law Olivia's wedding. Margaret fell in love with a breathtaking lakeside mansion she'd toured months earlier. She couldn't stop talking about it, saying it was the only place she'd ever imagined spending the rest of her life. She laughed whenever she mentioned the price, $8.8 million, because it was far beyond anything she could afford. I decided to make her dream come true. Without telling anyone except my attorney, I purchased the property through my company and arranged for her to receive the keys as a surprise gift. Margaret burst into tears. Daniel hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You've done more for my family than anyone ever has," he whispered. Standing there watching them celebrate, I honestly believed I'd finally been accepted. I had absolutely no idea that, only 3 days later, those same people would decide I didn't even deserve a seat at their family wedding. The morning of Olivia's wedding felt surprisingly peaceful. Daniel had already left early to help with last-minute preparations, while I stayed home getting ready. My emerald dress hung beside the bedroom window. My gift for the newlyweds sat neatly wrapped on the dining table, and the hairstylist had just finished curling my hair. I remember smiling at my reflection, thinking maybe this wedding would finally bring our family closer together. Then my phone vibrated. I expected Daniel asking where I was. Instead, I saw one message. "Don't come. Mom doesn't want you there. She says you're an embarrassment. It'll be better for everyone if you stay home." I read it once, then again, then a third time, because my mind refused to believe my husband had actually written those words. An embarrassment. 3 days earlier, that same family had stood in front of an $8.8 million mansion, hugging me, thanking me, calling me generous beyond words. Now I wasn't welcome in their family photos. I didn't cry. Not yet. I simply typed one word. Understood. Then I set my phone down and sat in complete silence. The longer I sat there, the more little moments from the past year began fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I'd never realized I was solving. Margaret constantly asking whether the mansion paperwork had been finalized. Olivia joking that family property should stay with family. Daniel encouraging me to transfer ownership completely instead of keeping everything under my company's name for convenience. Every conversation suddenly sounded different. None of them had been excited about me. They had been excited about what I could provide. I walked into my home office, opened the secure file containing every document related to the mansion purchase, and carefully reviewed each page. One sentence immediately caught my attention. The ownership transfer had not been completed. Legally, the property still belonged entirely to my company. For the first time that day, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood something far more important. They hadn't just excluded me from a wedding. They had underestimated the one person who had made their dream possible. I looked at the clock. It had been exactly 58 minutes since Daniel's message. The wedding ceremony would be starting soon. Instead of driving to the venue, I called my attorney, Michael Reynolds. He answered on the second ring. Emma, everything okay? I need you to review the Harbor Point property immediately. There was a brief pause before he replied. The mansion? Yes. I explained everything without raising my voice. I read Daniel's message word for word, then asked one simple question. Has legal ownership been transferred yet? Michael didn't answer immediately. I could hear him typing. Finally, he said, No. The occupancy agreement is active, but the title is still held entirely by Brooks Property Group. You retain full legal authority. That was all I needed to hear. Please suspend the final transfer, I said. Effective immediately. Done. My next call was to our property management company. I instructed them to deactivate all digital access codes, pause utility transfers still pending under the occupancy agreement, and notify the occupants that legal ownership was under formal review. Everything had to be handled professionally, politely, and completely within the contract. No confrontations, I added. Just follow the agreement exactly. Understood, Ms. Brooks. Then I closed my laptop. No angry social media posts. No dramatic phone calls. No desperate texts. Silence. About 40 minutes later, my phone finally buzzed. Daniel. I let it ring. Then Margaret called. I declined it. Another call. Then another. By the seventh missed call, I knew something had happened. An hour later, Olivia's husband sent a short text. Emma, what did you do? Your mother-in-law just walked out of the reception crying. Everyone's asking questions. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking my phone. I hadn't interrupted their wedding. I hadn't embarrassed anyone. I had simply exercised a legal right over property that was still mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to their choices. They were reacting to mine. Daniel showed up just after sunset. The moment I opened the front door, I barely recognized him. His tie was hanging loose, his jacket was wrinkled, and the confidence he usually carried had completely disappeared. What did you do? He demanded. I followed my attorney's advice, I answered calmly. Nothing more. You humiliated my mother in front of everyone. I stepped aside and motioned toward the dining room. Come in. He hesitated before walking inside. On the table sat 3 neatly organized folders. I think it's time you saw what I've been looking at all afternoon. He frowned. What is this? The truth. I opened the first folder. Inside were copies of emails between Margaret and Olivia discussing the mansion only days after I bought it. One message read, Once Emma transfers everything permanently, Daniel can finally stop pretending. She'll never see it coming. Daniel's face lost its color. Where did you get these? They were forwarded to me by mistake last month. I ignored them because I wanted to believe there had to be another explanation. I opened the second folder. Inside were text messages between Olivia and Margaret. Tell Daniel to keep pushing the ownership transfer. After the wedding, they'll probably separate anyway. Mom deserves that house, not Emma. Daniel stared silently. Then I slid the final folder across the table. It contained notes from a divorce consultation that Margaret had encouraged him to attend nearly a year earlier. Highlighted across one page were the words, Convince Emma to transfer major assets before filing. His hands started shaking. I never went through with any of this. But you never told me either. I replied quietly. You still sent me that text. Tears filled his eyes as he looked from the papers to me. I thought keeping everyone happy was the easiest way to avoid another family fight. I nodded slowly. And in doing that, you chose their comfort over our marriage. The room fell completely silent. He finally understood that the mansion had never been the real issue. The betrayal had begun long before the wedding, and it wasn't built on one cruel message. It had been built on months of silence, excuses, and choices that slowly destroyed the trust between us. The following week, everything unraveled faster than I ever expected. My attorney officially notified Margaret that the occupancy agreement had been terminated according to the terms she had signed. Since the ownership transfer had never been completed, the mansion legally remained my company's property. She had 30 days to move out. I didn't celebrate. I simply accepted the reality that generosity without respect eventually becomes exploitation. Daniel moved into a furnished apartment while the divorce proceedings began. He never argued over the house. He never demanded money. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed genuinely ashamed. A few days later, several of his relatives started calling me. Some wanted to clear up misunderstandings. Others insisted Margaret had only been trying to protect her family. One aunt even suggested I should forgive everyone because family makes mistakes. I politely thanked them for their concern before ending each conversation. None of them had called when I was labeled an embarrassment. My answer wasn't anger. It was distance. Meanwhile, the financial consequences quietly reached the rest of the family. Daniel's brother lost a development partnership because the investor had originally been introduced through my company. Olivia's husband realized the consulting contract he'd been negotiating depended entirely on relationships I had spent years building. Those opportunities disappeared without a single argument from me. I simply stepped away. People often assume revenge requires dramatic speeches or public humiliation. It doesn't. Sometimes all you have to do is stop carrying people who never appreciated being carried. A month later, the mansion was completely vacant. I walked through the front door one last time with my property manager. The rooms that had once echoed with excitement now sat silent. I looked across the lake through the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows and felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Relief. I finally understood that I hadn't lost a family. I'd lost the illusion of one. And somehow, that truth felt lighter than every sacrifice I'd made trying to earn love that should never have required a purchase in the first place. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, the mansion sold for slightly more than I'd originally paid. The real estate market had climbed, and my company earned a healthy profit. People assumed I celebrated. I didn't. Money had never been the reason I bought that house. I had purchased it because I genuinely believed kindness could build a family. Instead, it taught me that generosity without boundaries only attracts people who mistake gratitude for entitlement. Rather than buying another luxury property, I invested part of the proceeds into a housing foundation that helps military families and single parents purchase their first homes. For the first time in months, writing those donation checks felt better than signing the papers for an $8 million mansion ever had. One afternoon, Daniel asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost declined. Instead, I agreed. He looked older than I remembered. The confidence that once hid behind excuses had disappeared. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Not just for the text. For every time I asked you to stay silent instead of standing beside you." I listened without interrupting. "I kept telling myself I was protecting my family," he continued. "But the truth is you were my family, and I failed you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled gently. "I forgive you, Daniel." Hope briefly appeared in his eyes. Before he could speak, I continued. "But forgiveness isn't the same as trust." His smile slowly faded. "You taught me something I'll never forget," I said as I stood. "The people who truly love you never ask you to shrink yourself so someone else can feel bigger." I wished him well and walked out of the cafe without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw him. As I stepped into the afternoon sunshine, I realized something that no amount of money could ever buy. I hadn't reclaimed an $8.8 million mansion. I'd reclaimed my self-respect. And once you recover that, no one can ever take it away again. That became the greatest investment I would ever make.